It is a clear driver of that triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. Every year, the textile sector emits up to 8% of the world's greenhouse gases, uses the equivalent of 86 million Olympic-sized swimming pools of water, and generates 9% of microplastic pollution into our ocean, let alone, of course, engages with countries and industries to make the sector sustainable, and why, since 2020, UNEP has worked with the European Commission to promote circular business models. My sincere thanks to the Commission for this visionary partnership and for your efforts to champion sustainable and circular textile policies in the EU. I also encourage stronger policies domestically in the EU to ensure that the second-hand market, export market, is under better regulations. Adopting circular models is the best way to end overproduction and overconsumption, to reduce hazardous chemical use, and to ensure sustainable and durable clothing is accessible and affordable for everyone. In fact, such models include the design for circularity, resale, rental, repair, and refurbishment, and that could benefit the environment and be worth up to an estimated 700 billion by 2030. It can be done. This sector will spend an estimated 24 billion on influencer marketing alone in 2024. That money could be redirected to change aspirations towards sustainability and circularity, making the sector more resilient and more competitive and more responsible. There are some difficult circumstances to navigate, of course. The sector provides much need. And for taking this It also provides livelihoods for women, vulnerable workers, and SMEs. They must be supported when other countries' policies impact them. Hazardous chemicals are also a challenge. Their safety in circular processes and risk to workers, consumers.
Dus dit is micro 1, micro 1. Hallo, hallo. Oké, dus dan begin ik bij 2. Dit is micro 2. Hallo, hallo. Dan hebben we hier nummer 3. Nummer 4. Ja, omdat we dan die 5 zo gezegd hebben voor dat 5e panellid straks.
Hello? No. Hello? Ah, okay. Hello? No. Hello, good morning. I hope you can hear me okay. So we solved the first technical hurdle. I would like to kindly ask you to seat yourself. I think most of you are. Feel free to come forward, actually. We have a nice big room so that we can feel a little bit more comfortable. Good morning to you all. It is a great pleasure to welcome you here at this event at which we want to discuss how can we systemically transform the textile sector. The event is convened by the United Nations Environment Programme and the Belgian presidency of the Council of the EU. And many thanks to the Residence Palace for providing us this very beautiful space. My gratitude also goes to the European Environment Bureau, who supported us throughout this event, is going to support us throughout this event. Why we are organizing the conference here and now? Textile is in the front of the tackling of the triple planetary crisis, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. On one hand, textile sector creates many opportunities, livelihoods, but also creates impacts on the workers as well. But why we are here now is that it creates environmental impacts at every stage of its life cycle. Each year, the textile sector is estimated to be responsible for up to 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions because of the excessive consumption and natural resources and energy consumption. The size of 86 million Olympic swimming pools of water is used by the sector every year. One single shirt costs us about 3,000 liters, so that's a lot to pay. Of course, pollution that is caused by chemicals and microfiber. So where does UNEP's work come? We are trying to help to address these issues by focusing on high-impact sectors, which textile certainly is, and also helping to green industry. Last year, we launched the UNEP Textile initiative, which is a kind of a guide for sector-wide collaboration to accelerate just transition towards sustainable and circular textile value chain. Through policy changes, shifting practices of companies towards sustainability, but also engagement of financial institutions to finance circular economy, circular textile, and address also consumers through sustainable consumption principles. So today, what we want to do is to provide platform for discussion and for collaboration. How can we tackle these issues? First, we will have a panel that will look at key changes, but also key challenges, but also opportunities needed for transformation of the textile sector. In the second part, we will have a targeted debate with youth on sustainable fashion consumption. I would like to highlight that this second part was co-designed by young people. by some of you here in the room. So we are very much looking forward to the discussion there, which will be followed by open and interactive consultation with all of you. So I have to say that you have to stay the whole time through, because this will be a very interesting part as well. Moving on, I would like to share a little personal story. I'm from a generation that grew up with clothes made at home by mainly mothers or grandmothers. At that time, and in my country, there were not that many options, so we had to rely on that. I was lucky because my grandmother was a professional seamstress, so the dress that she made for me at that time, as when I was a teenager, I still, actually some have still in my wardrobe, so 35 years later, they are still in a good condition, because the material was good quality, the work was good quality, and she also had a little trick that she made a few centimeters on each side as reserve, just in case one would change the shape. So easily to adjust. Today I'm wearing a zero-waste skirt, unfortunately not made by my grandmother, but made by a small sustainable designer. Very nice. But it doesn't have the 2 centimeters anymore, which is a shame. But why I'm saying this, this story? I think that we lost the skills. We forgot about the skills that we used to have to make our own clothes, but also look after the clothes. And also the material is changing as well. That's why we have a discussion with industry today too, how to help, how to go back to the roots that were very normal for us. So my wish is that we go back to what we used to have, that having zero-waste skirt is not a luxury item, but it is a norm, not with hopefully also with the adjustable features. But anyway, we also need to use our resources very wisely. I would recall the Global Resource Outlook that was launched a few months ago that points out the state of play of the resources. So I do recommend also to have a look at that. So I'm very pleased that today we actually have, besides the discussions that I mentioned, that we also have a demonstration on display from 14 to 17-year-old students from the British School of Brussels that created some wonderful examples how you can recycle old clothes and how to be imaginative and still create very attractive garments. They also elaborated descriptions of their vision of sustainable textiles, so you can see it during the coffee break of the different panels. So they are not here yet, they will arrive, but I would like to applaud to them also for inspiring us. And finally, and most importantly, many thanks to each of you for coming today, joining the discussion here in the room, but also many thanks to those that are connected online and follow us online. There's quite a lot of participants online. And I hope that we will really have a discussion from the different perspectives, from the different stakeholders, from industry, policymakers, civil society, young people, many other stakeholders, banks. How can we together help to transform the textile sector? I am now delighted to introduce the first session, I mean not the first session, but the conference with two high-level statements, two opening statements by the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme, Ms. Inge Anderson, followed by Belgian Federal Minister for Environment, Climate, Sustainable Development and the Green Deal, Ms. Zakia Khattabi. Before we will put the statements on screen, I would like to say big thanks to the Belgian Ministry for Environment, Climate, Sustainable Development and the Green Deal, supporting us throughout this event. And John, you will talk later, but we very appreciate the cooperation. I would also like to thank to the organizational team from UNEP and from the presidency to have prepared us well for this conference. And because I will go now, after the videos are up, I would also like to warmly introduce Patricia, our dear friend. Patricia is the Deputy Secretary General of the European Environment Bureau. She will be moderating the first panel. She is also Director of the EU Governance, Sustainability and Global Policies, and she is a very strong voice of civil society in the international environmental agenda. So thank you, Patricia, for taking on the role. And now I would like to ask colleagues to put the first statement by the Executive Director of UNEP.
My thanks to the Belgian presidency of the Council of the EU for co-organizing this event with UNEP. Cheap and disposable clothing has taken over the world. The world has become addicted to fast fashion. Clothes that has been discarded in the global north and will be discarded here in the global south, and then ending up in our rivers, in our oceans, and often in the area where the poorest live. So cheap and disposable clothing has to be tackled head on. So does the second-hand clothing market, which is sold to the global south. There must be standards so that valuable clothing, yes, can be sold, but not clothing that is essentially ready for discarding. And that onus must lie on the exporter, not on the importer. My thanks to the Belgian presidency of the Council of the EU for co-organizing this event with UNEP. Cheap and disposable clothing has taken over the world. The world has become addicted to fast fashion. Clothes that has been discarded in the global north and will be discarded here in the global south, and then ending up in our rivers, in our oceans, and often in the area where the poorest live. So cheap and disposable clothing has to be tackled head on. So does the second-hand clothing market, which is sold to the global south. There must be standards so that valuable clothing, yes, can be sold, but not clothing that is essentially ready for discarding. And that onus must lie on the exporter, not on the importer. For people struggling to make ends meet, we know that the affordability of textiles can be a blessing, but the throwaway culture in wealthier countries really doesn't benefit anyone. It is a clear driver of that triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. Every year, the textile sector emits up to 8% of the world's greenhouse gases, uses the equivalent of 86 million Olympic-sized swimming pools of water, and generates 9% of microplastic pollution flowing into our oceans, let alone, of course, the discarded clothing that I described. Exploitation of workers is also deeply embedded. Women in particular face underpayment and forced labor and health risks. This is why UNEP engages with countries and industries to make the sector sustainable, and why, since 2020, UNEP has worked with the European Commission to promote circular business models. My sincere thanks to the Commission for this visionary partnership and for your efforts to champion sustainable and circular textile policies in the EU. I also encourage stronger policies domestically in the EU to ensure that the second-hand market, export market, is under better regulations. Adopting circular models is the best way to end overproduction and overconsumption, to reduce hazardous chemical use, and to ensure sustainable and durable clothing is accessible and affordable for everyone. In fact, such models include the design for circularity, resale, rental, repair, and refurbishment, and that could benefit the environment and be worth up to an estimated 700 billion by 2030. It can be done. This sector will spend an estimated 24 billion on influencer marketing alone in 2024. That money could be redirected to change aspirations towards sustainability and circularity, making the sector more resilient and more competitive and more responsible. There are some difficult circumstances to navigate, of course. The sector provides much needed GDP to many countries. It also provides livelihoods for women, vulnerable workers, and SMEs. They must be supported when other countries' policies impact them. Hazardous chemicals are also a challenge. Their safety in circular processes and risk to workers, consumers, and the environment are not well understood, and this is why more information is needed. Given the sector's complexity, there is a need for an unprecedented level of policy coherence and coordination across countries and between stakeholders. The EU can lead in this regard, and UNEP is working to build this coordination. We've created a roadmap outlining what each stakeholder, including policymakers, can do. We're already partnering with 14 countries to apply this roadmap. With support from the European Union, we're working along the entire value chain, promoting innovative circular business practices and economic models, including with the textile SMEs in Africa, and developing global guidelines on trade and used textiles. Today's event is another step towards a sustainable textile sector that serves everyone's needs. I look forward to hearing of the outcomes and for taking this important work forward. Thank you. My thanks to the Belgian presidency of the Council.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to address a pressing issue that impacts not only our present but also the future of our planet, the urgent need for a more sustainable textile supply chain. The textile industry, much like the agricultural sector, operates within a globalized framework with unequal rules and an unfair distribution of income among the different actors in the chain, resulting in significant environmental degradation and social injustices. Let us first acknowledge the profound environmental footprint of the textile industry. From deforestation and the excessive use of water and chemicals in production to the generation of vast amounts of waste and microplastics, the current practices of textile manufacturing contribute to widespread pollution and ecological harm. Moreover, the social costs of fast fashion cannot be ignored, with many workers facing exploitative labor conditions and meager wages in garment factories around the world. However, there are promising developments in the textile sector. For instance, European initiatives such as extended producer responsibility and regulations banning the destruction of unsold textiles represent important steps towards accountability and waste reduction. Similarly, efforts to regulate green claims and implement due diligence measures are crucial for safeguarding both human health and the environment. On the international level, we are discussing a global treaty to end plastic pollution, and this treaty may have an important effect on the textile sector that relies heavily on fossil fuel plastics. Yet, while these initiatives are commendable, they alone are not sufficient to address the systemic issues plaguing the textile industry. What we need is nothing short of a paradigm shift towards a circular and just textile economy. This means that we need to reduce the environmental footprint of the textile supply chain so that it operates within the planetary boundaries. It is also a supply chain that prioritizes fair wages and working conditions. We also need to reduce the demand for textiles by fostering production and consumption models that are based on high-quality textiles that last a long lifetime and are reused instead of discarded. Finally, we need to address the issue of exports of low-quality second-hand textiles and textile waste to countries where no socially and environmentally sound treatment is guaranteed. This transition will require green entrepreneurship and consumption models that are underpinned by robust regulatory frameworks to support an intensive sustainable practices. Importantly, this is not a question of choosing between the economy and the environment. Rather, it is about fostering an economy that is resilient, equitable, and in harmony with both people and the planet, where no one is left behind. I thank the UNEP Secretariat for organizing this event together with the Belgian presidency of the European Union. As we convene today, I urge each of you to engage in fruitful discussions and deliberations. Let us use this opportunity to lay the groundwork for policy recommendations that can be implemented at both national and international levels. Together, we have the power to shape a future where the textile industry serves as a model of social and environmental responsibility. Thank you for your attention, and may your deliberations today pave the way for meaningful change.
Many thanks to Minister Katabi and Executive Director Anderson for setting us for the discussion now. I will hand over to Patricia now, but many thanks again to all of you, and I very much look forward to hearing your stories. Over to you.
Okay, good morning again also from my side to the panel discussion of today's event. I'm very happy to be with you and to be moderating the discussion. So the EEB is the largest federation of citizens' environmental organizations in our region, and in the last years we have been working together with a lot of partners to shape the new European strategy for sustainable and circular textiles, but we've also been working a lot on new legislation, on product policy, on waste and chemical policy, for instance, in order to make the textile sector more sustainable, which is why we're happy to be part of today's discussion. So we've heard it already from the previous speakers that the textile sector is, well, one of the biggest employers in the world, with a total of 430 million people who are somehow involved in the sector, from growing the fibers to selling the final products in the stores. So that's obviously massive. And we've also heard how clothing, footwear, and household textiles have also a very significant environmental impact on land and water use, on emissions, through waste and landfills, but also on biodiversity and ultimately health impacts. In 2020, the textile consumption in the EU alone, for instance, created the third highest pressure on land and water use, and the fifth highest impact on raw material use of our region's environmental footprint. And only looking at the textile market in Europe, 60 million workers globally are linked to our textile market in Europe. And as we've heard it before, those workers, unfortunately, even though we've had at least 2 decades of discussions about labor rights in the sector, still work under indecent conditions. And we've also heard it, 80% of them are women. So these are a few reasons why this is one of the key transition sectors when we look at our pathway towards carbon neutrality, zero pollution, and nature restoration. So what is it that we'd like to discuss now on the panel? We would like to discuss how the textile sector globally can become circular and sustainable, how we can reduce material use and consumption, and how we can move towards a more equitable value and supply chain in the sector. So Veronica has already mentioned the UNEP's initiatives. We have the global roadmap on textiles and the One UNEP Textile Initiative, and both of them stress the need also for stronger policies to guide the sector and to create a level playing field globally and to set the right incentives for the industry. So this is why we'd like to discuss about the role of policy in making the textile sector more sustainable, and also to see how we can make sure the sector contributes to the international environmental agreements that we already have on waste, on chemicals, on emissions, and also on biodiversity protection. And the Minister just mentioned also the negotiations of the Plastics Treaty. So before we go into the discussion, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Ladies first, I will start with Jana Ryzkova. She's a EU Policy and Public Affairs Manager with Decathlon. Decathlon is one of the largest sports retailers globally. So welcome, Jana, to the panel. Then we have with us Pankaj Fukan. You're the first Secretary for Commerce at the Indian Embassy here in Belgium. And India is actually the world's second largest exporter of textiles, so a global player in the industry. It's also the second largest producer of fibers and the world's largest producer of cotton and jute. It's a sector which has the second highest number of employees and workers in your country, a country of more than 1 billion people. So indeed a key sector also for your country's transition. Welcome to the panel. Then we have with us Karsten Sorensen from the European Commission. You're Deputy Head of Unit at the DG for International Partnership. And you're working mostly on trade and the private sector in our partnerships with partner countries. I'm curious to discuss a bit more with you how the EU can foster policy dialogue also around environmental and climate issues linked to the sector, and of course creating more equity. And then finally we have with us John Wante. You work with the Minister Zakia Katabi, who has just spoken to us, the Federal Minister here in Belgium, and you advise on product policy. And the Belgian presidency has made both the just transition, but also circularity and resource use priorities for your 6 months presidency of the Council of the EU. So I'm sure there's a lot we can talk about, and your presidency's support for these topics is much appreciated also by us in the environmental movement. So thank you for being with us, John. Let's go into a first round of questions. I'll have 2 questions for all of our panelists, and I hope you will keep it short so we can also see what you would like to discuss with the panelists after the first 2 rounds of questions. So I'd like to start with you, John, following up to what we heard from your minister. We have seen a lot of policy developments in these last 5 years under the European Green Deal on EU legislation, and there's also some upcoming EU legislation that pertains to the textile sector. So can you explain a bit more how you think these new policies that we've adopted and that are still in the pipeline can really contribute to systemic change and a green transition in the textile sector? But are there also things that are still missing, and are there gaps that your government would like to close?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I think we have made some major steps forwards on the regulatory framework, also for textiles. For instance, the eco-design regulation has been adopted, and that is giving us a new framework for regulating the products that come on the market. So it will be possible to lay down standards for repairability, for a lifetime extension, durability. That is very important, I think, because if we want to reduce the consumption of primary resources for textiles, we really need standards for better textiles that last longer. There's also a ban introduced on the destruction of unsold new textiles, which is also very important, I think, because almost 30% of textiles that are placed on the market are never sold. So if we can find a way to reintroduce those textiles on the market, on the second-hand market, or even succeed in reducing the amount of textiles put on the market, that will also contribute to less primary resource use. We also have the Waste Framework Directive, which is now under discussion, and that is working on an extended producer responsibility for textiles, for more separate collection, more recycling, more reuse of textiles. So that is also a very important piece of instrument. And then we have the Green Claims Directive, which is under discussion, which will be able to give stronger rules on when you put a label on a product and say that it has environmental benefits, that it is really underpinned by scientific evidence. But of course, there are just first pieces there's just a foundation, and we still need a lot of work in in the future. For instance, when we talk about product standards, we really have to make sure that we really introduce the durability criteria. So the framework is in place, but that doesn't mean that the criteria are already there. So the coming years, Europe will have to do a lot of work on laying down the criteria. The Green Claims Directive, I think that is also an important step forward, but I think in the future we don't only need green claims, we really need labels that tell us what is the environmental and social performance of a product, not only of the good products, but also of the bad products. So that I think, and also extended producer responsibility, I also think that is something that is to be used not only for organizing better collection and recycling, but also for introducing new business models that put reuse and lifetime extension in the center. Yeah.
Thank you, John, for running us through all these recent and hopefully future development and policy. I'd like to move from Europe to India, because we've heard that your country is one of the main exporters, and I'm sure many of us are wearing textiles today that have probably been assembled in India. So, and the textile sector in India also has a very rich history, actually, over centuries. I mean, India has been a leading textile producer, not just for the last decades, but over centuries, really. And you also have that very long-standing tradition of, being a main producer also of natural fibers. So I'd like to ask you what your government's priorities are when it comes to reforming the textile sector, because in the current setup, of course, the producer countries are often the ones that are kind of locked in at the lowest end of the global value chain. So transforming the sector can, of course, also be an opportunity to change that and to add or create more value also in the countries that produce textiles. So can you run us through some political policy priorities in the textile sector? And also, do you see any policy priorities where you think we could benefit from more global coordination as well around those?
Thank you. The Indian textile policy originally was established in around 2000, the year 2000. But recently, we have actually upgraded it to match our nationally determined contributions in the Paris Agreement. Because of these commitments, we have integrated them into almost all sectors. We are focused mostly on the energy-intensive sectors, of course, but textile also form an important part of that. You mentioned that most of our textile industry was actually originally based on natural fibers. Of course, a lot of man-made fibers have also been introduced, in the subsequent years. We have tried to ensure that the focus remains on natural fibers and on the small and medium producers, which form the bulk of our producers. In this case, the government has come up with a lot of schemes to encourage and help them out. We are still in the process of this transformation, of course, and it will require some time. Our focus is on something called the Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme, in which we want to first strengthen our domestic industry so that we reach those standards which are expected now from most producers, and then we focus on the trade aspect of it. In the meantime, we have, of course, also strengthened our global connections. For instance, India recently joined the Global Alliance for Resource Efficiency and Circular Economy. And there is one special thing I would like to mention, though, which generally is kind of not focused on in policy circles, which is the individual aspect of it, which has been an area of focus I can see in these discussions here today. However much you change the policy, if the thinking of people that they need to do something on their own part personally, if that change doesn't come, it will be difficult to kind of achieve these goals. In this case, our Prime Minister did come up with an initiative called Lifestyle for Environment, which focuses specifically on areas where individuals can do certain things in their daily lives to ensure that these changes are reflected at a micro level. And of course, food, clothing, and use of water resources at an individual level, these form the basics of the lifestyle for Environment mission. He introduced this in 2022 at the COP, and he has actually personally promoted it. He has recently been promoting and in public events been wearing clothing that is made entirely of recycled material, which has gained a lot of popularity. So this is one aspect I would say is like that a push that has been provided for individual action in this sector as well. We hope to cooperate with our major partners like the EU in these areas, and we have been watching with interest the recent waste shipment regulation that has come up, and we intend to work with the EU to take this forward.
Thank you, Pankaj. So let's go to the EU, the European Commission, and I'd like to ask you, Karsten. We've heard about these new standards that have been set. We heard also from Pankaj how, for instance, the Indian government is also, of course, trying to adhere to those standards. So, what can the European Commission, what can our side do to support our trade partners in adhering to those standards, also, how can we help to coordinate, not just between the EU and our direct trade partners, but globally? How can we contribute to coordinating policy for a more sustainable textile sector?
Yeah, thank you very much, Patricia, and really very, very happy to be here. And I would linking up to what Pankaj said, I would like to take sort of half a step back. In the European Commission, we are, I wouldn't say caught between a rock and a hard place, because both places are profoundly nice, but there are two contradictory, two aspects that may seem contradictory. On the one hand, we have the request of our consumers, of the citizens who we serve, who are more and more aware of exactly the points that Pankaj mentioned about sustainability of clothing, of the traceability of things, to be sure that we know where things come from, and there's a very, very high awareness of what we as consumers want to wear and don't want to wear. At the same time, and this calls for regulations, for legislations, etc. At the same time, we are very easily and very happily criticized all over the world for introducing standards ensuring exactly that on our markets. I think it's no secret to say that, for example, the deforestation regulation does not necessarily increase our popularity across the world these days, but we still think it's a very useful tool in order to, for example, ensure that sustainability in a wider sense is applied on our market. So what can we do in order to try and link up both aspects of serving our consumers, serving all the and respecting all of the commitments, the Paris Agreement, etc. We are subscribed to, but at the same time not moving the cursor so much that in the end it's not applicable, and then the best becomes the enemy of the good. And we. Here, what we are trying to do in the JINPA is to, in the Director General for International Partnerships, the nostalgics of us still remember that as Development Cooperation, but this is called differently today. We have tried to set up and support a pilot project together with international institutions, i.e. ITC and UNECE in this case, and with a strong involvement of the private sector. Because what we should not forget when we are sitting here and discuss among us, and I think Jana will be that voice today, that there's a real world out there. People have to implement, who have to do it, who have to produce it, have to sell it. And so these partners are included in that project where where UNECE and ITC have set up a sort of a two-step approach in setting the scene and giving an example of what can be done. Without going into any specific details, from the ITC side, they have said they have collected an enormous amount of data. They collect the results of audits and compare different system of audits around and made those available, and hence helping companies in the value chain to be able to have the information and rely on audits that have been performed without replicating them again and again and again. Because if you know a big company, I don't know what the number is of audits they have to fulfill, but it's adding on money every time and costs. And if you have a possibility to see that an audit has already been done and it's comparable to yours, you save a lot of money, a lot of time, and it's getting really interesting, and it's an incentive to do these audits for companies. UNEP, on its part, through what they call their sustainability pledge, are doing advocacy for this, trying to make sure that this enters into legislation, that the information is spread, etc., etc. So to conclude, what we wanted to do here is to show that it is possible to work towards high standards while not making life for our business impossible, by creating a mechanism that ensures that double work is unnecessary to the extent possible, that money can be saved, and that there's a real incentive to subscribing to that sort of approach. In the end, providing a competitive advantage of what still is the biggest market on the world, with 450 million consumers, of a high purchasing capacity, so as to be in a position to sell products to a population that is increasingly conscious of the environmental and social impact of what we are wearing. I think I'll stop here for this.
Thanks a lot, Carsten. I'm glad you mentioned the UNEP and ICT project, because kind of information sharing and traceability is, of course, one of the key issues that we are also working on in environmental organizations when it comes to textiles, and kind of setting or helping to set a global standard for traceability is for sure, or can for sure be one kind of key element to transform the sector, and that also links back to what Pankaj said about. I remember in India's initiative at the last UN Environment Assembly promoting also better cooperation on kind of sustainable lifestyles, and I agree with you that it also needs a cultural shift in how we as consumers, as people wearing clothes, perceive clothes and how we want to consume. But for instance, if traceability and information is not shared with the consumer, then there's only so much we can do. So I'm glad you mentioned that project, Carsten. Let me go to Jana, our industry representative, and I'd like to dive a little bit deeper with you into how the industry can address some of the challenges in the textile industry. We talked about the various environmental and social impacts already. So specifically looking at the health impacts of textiles and footwear, chemicals have been mentioned, but also fiber fragmentation, microplastics is one of the buzzwords here in the textile products. How can we ensure safe products, and how can we ensure safety for consumers and also the producers? Can you share a bit with us what kind of changes the sector sees necessary here?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Patricia. So to take a step back, it's Decathlon's purpose to move people through wonders of sport, and you can only very hardly do that on a burning planet in polluted environments. So it's very much in the company DNA to work towards getting the environmental action within the company right. And to be very clear, it's not only for the planet, for the future generations. Of course, it's our duty, but it's also for the longevity of the business. We must care, and that's why we really work hard to ensure that our products are safe, to ensure that they have the lowest possible environmental impact, conducting our business, respecting planetary boundaries. I will pick up maybe on the microplastics issue. We take it seriously. This is not a new issue. At the same time, evidence collection is only increasing in the past years. And that's why we believe it's really necessary to take collective action to tackle this. We are involved in a couple initiatives together with partners, Fashion Pact, importantly Microfiber Consortium. We have in-house researchers performing tests, checking the types of yarns, checking the types of technological processes that lead to the best results. The goal is clear: to phase out the types of textiles that are not performing well, and really to boost the types of production that could tackle this issue. To come up with new techniques that would lead us to the best results. Of course, it's best to do this together with partners, building data collection, exchanging best practices. We already know that we have the first guidelines ready on what to do, and sometimes they are not so difficult to implement. I don't know, I can give you a few examples. One would be already industrial pre-washing, ensuring proper filtration systems already at the plants. Then we would, and why I'm saying this, of course, it would be best if we had clear legislation, if these rules could be mandatory. At the moment, harmonized rules are often missing, so I'm calling on the policymakers to help us come up with them and to come up with clear rules. The same for industrial washing. It would be great if this was a level playing field and if it was applied across the board. As was mentioned already by other speakers, in Europe, we live in the best of times for textiles policymaking. We have the eco-design rules being negotiated right now. So why not include rules on microfiber shedding, maximum thresholds? We would be really happy to contribute to that work, and it's important to get this right because, well, it's an important topic, and even though the evidence is increasing on how to best tackle the issue, we need to act now. There's no time to waste.
Thank you, Jana. It's always good to hear from an industry representative that regulation helps to create a level playing field, and yeah, that's good to hear. I'd like to go back to John for a moment, looking a little bit ahead, also because we are looking towards a new kind of political mandate, a new political era, also at the EU level, and we recently heard or saw the results of the International Resource Panel's first Global Resource Outlook. And the report, while not just providing very striking data on the increase of raw material use across sectors, the report also very clearly called for both global and national resource use pathways and kind of systemic changes to address excess consumption and resource use. So. While with the European Green Deal, we've seen a lot of traction for new legislation, what we have not achieved with the European Green Deal is some kind of a regulatory framework around resource use or even resource use reduction targets, including such targets for specific sectors, such as the textile sector. So do you think that in the next legislative cycle, we should be working on a European framework on resource use, and specifically on targets for high impact sectors like the textile industry?
Well, I think it is very important to have a clear target or clear direction in what is the amount of resources we can use to be sustainable. So we have a very clear climate targets, say within 1.5 degrees Celsius. But for resources, we don't have such a target. When we talk about materials, we talk about circular economy, we talk about percentages of recycling that needs to be reached, but we never talk about how many resources we can actually consume to be sustainable. And I think we need to lay down the foundation the coming years to get a better view on what is the amount of primary resources we can consume to be sustainable, and taking into account both the planetary boundaries, but also taking into account social boundaries, because we Europeans, we are not the only people living on this planet. We also have to take care that there is a fair share also for the other people in the world. So we really need to address that and set up a process to get a first idea of what is actually a sustainable consumption level of primary resources. On the basis of that, we can lay down targets, just like we have a climate target, and then we can start really designing policies around them. And the fact that we don't have those targets today makes it a bit possible to really lay down the necessary circular economy measures, because we take measures, but we don't know how far they need to go. And I think the moment we have those targets, it will also become clear that recycling will not be enough, that we also need to address the consumption levels, that we also need to address the business models. And that is, that's not an easy thing to do. There will be a lot of resistance, both from consumers, but also from industry, from producers. But therefore, we need those evidence-based targets.
Thank you. Yeah, and that also reminds me that we already passed the overshoot day in Europe already a couple of weeks ago, and we're just at the beginning of the second quarter, which is an illustration of how, as you said, we're using too many of the resources in our region, and that needs to be addressed. And that also links to my next question for Pankaj, because India is not just an exporter of new textile products, it's also a receiving country of second-hand textiles. I think the figure is more than 100 million kilograms of exports of used textiles from the EU alone to India. That was a figure from 2019. According to the ECE, India is one of the top 10 receiving countries of second-hand textiles in the world. So can you tell us a little bit more about the fate of those second-hand textiles in India, and eventually also the environmental and social impacts they have? We've also heard it from Inger Anderson, who lives in Kenya, another country that is heavily affected by the impact of second-hand textiles. And what is your vision of the future of global trade in second-hand or used textiles? Should there even be a ban on trading waste textiles under the Basel Convention?
This is actually a complicated question because it involves multiple strands. Okay, let me. I do not think something like a complete ban on the export of, waste material should be enforced, because it kind of defies global trends. If it was possible for a certain geography to utilize, recycle, and effectively manage all their waste, it would be possible only in that kind of scenario. But it is not possible, I don't think so, for any developed or developing nation today to do that. There is a certain value chain even in waste materials, and it has been established over the years. So that is my first point. But I understand that the EU loves to regulate, and they are very good at it, which is why you have the Brussels effect, and their regulations are accepted and respected worldwide. What would be, and I'm talking in the context of, for instance, the waste shipment regulation again, which I think is the overarching umbrella regulation that has come up recently, which informs most of these discussions. It would actually be a little more pleasant for its trading partners if it did not just ask them to follow, but also took them along. What I'm talking about here is that the regulations are only effective if the major trading partners with which continued trade is going to be a reality, if they are taken along in terms of capacity building. This is especially true for small producers who, I would like to believe, at least in India, actually do follow, in practical terms, most of these sustainable methods of production. But the norms for traceability, reporting may be onerous for them. So there has to be a system in place which I think trading partners can discuss and decide and implement, which includes both structures where these smaller producers especially can be helped in following these regulations, and also maybe technology transfer, if such technology is available with another partner, to manage these things better. I would say that the EU's sustainable textile regulation that is at the base of the discussions today, it does mention partnership with other major partners on the value chain management and export of waste to third countries. it's the principles are all enshrined there, but it would be good in case we also see how it plans to implement them with its major trading partners.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we already kind of touched upon that question with Karsten a little bit, that where we might be meaning well, it's of course very important to get the most important partners into the debate from the very start to make sure that legislation can also work at the end of the day. And you mentioned that the small and medium-sized producers, which are very important, especially also in India and in the sector. And we also had a very fierce debate here at the European level about due diligence regulation or a directive, where, of course, the intention was also to make sure that the responsibility is with the large companies that trade and retail the products, and not just to kick down all the responsibility to the small producers. So I think that's a very valid point. But coming back a little bit to the question of traceability that we've already talked about, Karsten, also in terms of global collaboration on that. Do you see an opportunity at the EU level with the revision of the textile labeling regulation to eventually include a digital label and a digital product passport as part of the eco-design framework, which could apply to textile products? Is that also something that's being discussed as part of the global coordination around global standards for traceability?
In this specific area, I think I would rather let colleagues from the responsible directorate go into the details there, because I do admit that I'm not aware of the details of it. However, it is clear that regulation at the EU level and the so-called Brussels effect is indeed something that it's not always seen as the right way of doing by our trade partners. To that, I would like to add that on the one hand, we are not regulating foreign markets. We are regulating what enters our market and what our producers use. So it's part of the economic sovereignty, which is a much used word these days. And we are not doing that in a void. We're doing that because we consider that, as I mentioned earlier, this answers the requests and the requirements of our population and of those who elect those who, in the end, vote or not for that sort of regulation. So it's, in short, it's part of the way our democratic system functions, and it's not actually something where we could answer with yes or no or in or out. It's there, and the question is, how are we going to do it? And here, indeed, when we negotiate agreements with our partners, trade agreements, there is a dedicated chapter on that sort of aspect, sustainability criteria at large. And in that context, we obviously negotiate, which means it's a give and take, and we meet in the middle on ways and means that could help implement these requirements when it comes to trading with us. This does not necessarily mean a transfer of funds or a transfer of technology. That can very much mean also help increasing the capacities of testing laboratories, increasing the awareness of the requirements of the European market, etc., etc. And under the so-called Aid for Trade label, this is something which we have been doing for many decades. Then, of course, we are very happy to discuss if we need to adjust that, to adapt that, if we do it right or if we got it wrong here and there. That's not the point, but it's very clear that this is part of our endeavors. When it comes to sort of global regulation, which was mentioned before, obviously it would be nice to have one global standard for everybody would use. In some areas this may be possible, in other areas this may not, and we also need to see whether or to what extent it is useful to over-regulate. For example, what I mentioned with that project we are implementing with ITC and UNEP, it's very much also about interoperability, of acceptance of other standards. So that could also be a way forward, that we work towards convergence of, increased convergence of what is out there, so as to be sure that companies don't have to test twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And if you look at the reality of things, so big companies, and I don't have any precise information, but of Decathlon, for example, I'm sure it's happening there as well. Big companies do know where they source their stuff from. It's not, times are gone where people just go and buy the cheapest on the market. We all need to know where our ingredients come from and how they are used, so that that possibility does exist, because it's in operation. So, and linking back to the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive that you mentioned, that's exactly where we feel that. And I agree entirely with you that it's not sort of for the last element of the value chain to live up to the requirements, but it's mainly for the big companies to ensure and help that this can be implemented. So I do feel that we are not that badly placed when it comes to having a sustainable and sort of how can I say it, balanced approach to regulation, to regulating our market, and also how this influences the relationship with our trading partners. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Carsten. And I mean, we obviously agree with you that as one of the biggest consumer markets in the world, we do have a responsibility to regulate what comes onto our market and what we let our consumers consume. Indeed, as long as we make sure that those who have to comply with those standards globally also get sufficient support in that and are included also in the standard setting. And maybe I'm looking at Emmanuel, because we actually do have the expert from DG Environment with us for the conclusion. So maybe you want to comment later on in your conclusions also on textile labeling and digital product passport. So I have one more question for Jana, and then I hope that you have questions as well for the panelists. So Jana, we already talked about impact, health impacts linked to textiles and chemicals and microplastics, for instance. But I also like to ask you about kind of working conditions and let's say the strength or weakness of voluntary initiatives there. I mean, again and again, research shows that voluntary commitments do not really help enough to make sure that workers receive living wages. There was a recent study from Transform Trade and the University of Aberdeen, which again showed that major fashion brands pay below the production cost, even in some cases in Bangladeshi factories. So do you think that EU legislation on purchasing practices could help to shift power imbalances here between buyers and suppliers? And can you talk a bit more about industry engagement in ensuring living wages?
Thanks, Patricia. So, as was just mentioned by Carsten, indeed, Decathlon is in a privileged position. We can choose our suppliers, we choose our partners carefully, we ensure that everyone follows a rigorous code of conduct, whether it's Decathlon operations, direct ones and indirect ones. Maybe not everyone is in the same position within the sector, but for us, we really take our responsibility seriously. Taking one step back, responsibility and commitment to social justice. The first opening thing is that environmental justice is social justice, which is, again, one of the reasons why we are really trying to do as much as we can to ensure that our climate action is ambitious, that our work on eco-design is in place, and that we're developing circular business models more and more. But to go back to social aspects, well, we have a human rights policy in place that's directly referring Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Declaration of Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, all the big documents. We fully support it, and think it's our responsibility to ensure that everyone involved in production lives a good life with good working condition. That's why we also have a program on employee wages around the world. Yes, maybe it's voluntary again, so it's what you were referring to. But we work together with an NGO wage indicator. So first we were mapping production and distribution because we identified those sectors as most at risk. But by the end of next year, we should map everything. And then as a remediation plan, by 2026, we have a decent wage target. So, of course, now we are not talking about minimum wage. That's a compliance question. We're talking about fair, decent wage. And HR teams in different countries were already trained on this. So all our operations are aware that we expect this. And, of course, we are developing, we are monitoring developments, and I hope I won't get into trouble for saying this because this project is still not finalized. But from what I understand, the adjustment will have to be made not only in the operations outside of Europe, but also in Europe. So it's indeed very interesting. But as I said earlier, as a globally operating company, we always welcome regulation. We welcome regulation in Europe. We welcome regulation globally. So. The rules that are clear and that apply for everyone and that are clearly enforced, well, bring them on.
Great. Yeah, it's also good to hear that more and more global retailers actually want to know and do know all the, to the second, third, and whatever tier with whom they're working. And it's also part of traceability of the actual production sites, which also links back to kind of the right to information of consumers, what they're actually buying. And I do remember 20 years ago when I was actually working in Bangladesh with on the textile sector, that we had to go around the dustbins and the waste, the discarded overproduction to find out which company was producing in which factory, because that was the only way of getting the information. So let's see if we have questions from the audience. I do think we have a microphone, yes, so give me a show of hands, and maybe just tell to whom you want to ask a question, and don't be shy. I'm sure, yes, there's one hand over there. Maybe I was just checking. Do we? Yes, and the gentleman in the front, and maybe one more, if there's one more, and the gentleman over there. Okay, please.
I was interested what the answer on your last question would be from the First Secretary, Embassy of India. I would like to know your answer on that question.
You mean regarding the living wages? Or?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Then we had the gentleman here.
Hello, thank you. Dariusz Dybka. I would have a quick question to the European Commission, maybe about the future of the European Green Deal, because we targeted most of the sectors, and apparently the textile industry is crucial here as well. So I'm thinking the next term of the European Commission. And maybe another question to Decathlon. Jana, if you could answer a little bit of the bigger picture as well. I remember in Glasgow, in climate negotiations, we had this opening of sustainable fashion discussion. Maybe you have a new contribution for the bigger agenda on the UNEP UNEP frameworks. Thank you.
Great. And then there was one last question over here.
Thank you. What's the role, how you guys see the natural fibers against the artificial fibers? Of course, speaking about new clothes or new garment, and how the carbon footprint will be analyzed for those.
Great. So I think we can take one more. The lady here in the...
Thank you. My name is Ioana Betian. I work with an organization called Organic Cotton Accelerator. We work with farmers in India, Pakistan, and Turkey. I have a follow-up question from what Mr. Pukan said about collaboration, and I really liked the sentence taking us along. What is European Commission setting up as a framework of collaboration with the producing countries to make sure that nobody is left behind? Thank you.
Great. Okay, I see no more hands coming up. I'll take one more. There's another lady in the back, yes, with a hand up.
Biljana Ignatova from Tomra. I have a question which is about, well, it was mentioned by the panelists, the textile value chain from production to end of life is very globalized value chain. So this systemic transformation that we are talking about is a global challenge. So then shouldn't we go beyond thinking and talking about global collaboration and deliberations and guidance to more policy and regulations on a global scale? So can we imagine having a global treaty on sustainable textiles? So a holistic global framework reflecting the EU textile strategy. So sustainability aspects, justice, social aspects, circularity aspects, etc. Of course, it's a complex thing to do, but what is the cost of not doing it and not thinking about it? Thanks.
Great, wonderful questions. And I think there was a bit of something for everyone here on the panel. So I suggest that we just let each of you answer to one or several of the questions. So Pankaj, do you want to start? There was a question around living wage, but also the role of natural fibers versus artificial fossil fuel-based fibers, and also the question around eventually a global treaty on textiles.
Sure, thank you. On living wages, India has domestic norms, labor laws, which have been rigorously implemented since the beginning of our era of industrialization. We have a big population which is on the margins, and along with the regular labor laws and ILO conventions, most of which we have signed and the others are under ratification now, in a process of ratification. We also have certain programs to uplift the people who are still left behind. Like we have something called an MG Narega scheme. This is a government scheme which ensures a minimum level of employment for certain days in a year for people who qualify for this scheme. And there is no bar on joining this kind of scheme. You just, you have to apply, and the government ensures that you will get a certain number of days of employment and wages for that. So this is in addition to industrial labor wages, for which we already have norms. We understand that a lot of work still needs to be done, and we keep trying to do more. On the natural fiber versus man-made fiber thing, India has traditionally used natural fibers, and we have in the recent years seen a revival, both because of consumer choices as well as because of government programs in the use of natural fibers. Now, the traditional handicraft, the textile industry was hand-woven in India, and these products hold a lot of value for consumers. In my personal opinion, if we want to actually go to a time where clothing is valued more and is held on for longer periods, like what was mentioned regarding that it was originally made at home by grandmothers and mothers. This, the promotion of handmade natural fiber textiles is something that we can actually consider, because I don't know what other countries, but in India, they hold a lot of value. People keep them for very long periods, and they are worn with love and care. So that is one. Of course, it is probably not enough to clothe an entire population of the world, but I think we can find a solution which is somewhere in the middle by promoting them to a much greater extent. Thank you for the question. And regarding the global, like a global kind of convention on sustainable textiles, I think if the major partners, both producers and consumers, come together, that is very much a possibility that we can and should consider, actually. Yeah. but I'm not sure, how we can go about it. It'll probably require a lot of work. But yes, I think, at least between like-minded partners, the negotiations or discussions on trade could be a starting point for that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Pankaj. Jana, I think there was also one question specifically regarding to climate mitigation ambitions and new initiatives linked to Paris Agreement and UNFCCC. Maybe you want to comment on the question of emissions again, and maybe also on the role of synthetic fibers, which of course the rise of synthetic fibers is one of the key issues that we're talking about here.
Yes, thank you for the questions. Regarding the synthetic versus natural fibers, well, we produce sports clothes, so our engineers always try to pick materials that are fit for purpose and choose based on materials and then improve them using eco-design strategies and try to get the best possible properties. So natural fibers, for example, cotton, is excellent and widely used within our company for low-impact sports and for example, for yoga, for sports like that. For other purposes, polyester might be more useful because it dries easily. It has very good properties when it comes to sweat management or however it's called. So it's our goal to ensure that all garments have the lowest impact possible, are durable, are fit for function. So this would be my answer. Like both have a place in our production, and for both streams, we're trying to improve as much as we can. The question about the climate, I think I might need to circle back about it. Of course, like our company has clear climate goals with the benchmark of 2021, so greenhouse gas reductions, of course, 0 until 2050, that's obvious, but it's 20% until 2026 and 42% until 2030 across the value chain, so tier 1, 2, 3. Yes, and also I shall say, actually, our monthly bonuses are not only paid based on the financial performance, but also based on the environmental performance. The largest part of the bonus calculation would be exactly the GHG reductions. So it's ingrained in the performance indicators for both for us and for the execs. So it's there. But on the very specific contributions, I would be happy to continue discussing.
Thank you, Jana. John, I think there was no question particularly targeted at you, but maybe you heard one or the other question and you wanted to comment on one or the other aspect that the participants brought up.
On the question, natural fibers versus fossil fuel clothes, I think we need to have a good view on the environmental impact of the material. So it's both biomaterials and synthetic materials have an environmental impact. Certainly, for instance, if you take natural fibers and they have been treated with a lot of pesticides, they also have a major impact. So it's not from the start that you can say that natural fibers are better from an environmental perspective than synthetic fibers. So I think the priority should go to lowering the environmental footprint of your textile, regardless from what source it has been made. Detoxify the textiles, so avoid any toxic chemicals, both in the textiles and also in the production phase. And I think you should also design the textiles in such a way that they can be easily recycled afterwards. And depending on all those criteria, in one case you may end up with a natural fiber that is best, and in the other case it will be a fossil fiber, I think. And then on the global treaty on textiles, yes, I think that we should make steps towards a global treaty. We are now in the middle of discussions for a global treaty on plastics. We all know that this is a very difficult negotiation process, and that the focus is primarily on plastic waste management. but the more ambitious countries want to also discuss limits on plastic production and want to take upstream measures, demand-side measures. And we know that this is a very difficult thing to do, but that's not a reason for not trying to establish global rules, because if you don't have global treaties, you will always get the argument against you that you are not working towards a level playing field and all that. So yes, we need, I think, a global treaty, but of course it cannot be used as an excuse not having a global treaty for not acting locally. So we have to act on all levels at the same time, I think.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And there was one very interesting question from the colleague here. What comes after the European Green Deal? I think that's the €1 million question. And I'm curious to hear what Carsten is going to say. If you ask us, the answer is don't stop now, despite all the backlash, despite all the disinformation. It's time to go even further and accelerate. We launched our vision as the environmental movement just on Monday, a European Pact for the Future, also with very clear ideas around resource use reduction targets and a toxic-free circular economy. So yeah, Carsten, do you have any final words and answers to the questions?
Yeah, it's a very interesting crystal ball question, and obviously you would like me to firmly commit the incoming college to their legislative program, which I'm extremely happy to do. No, jokes apart, the Green Deal is there to stay. You know, in whatever form, whatever label. You know, it's I think a very useful and a very efficient slogan, label, whatever you would call it, put on environmental legislation and coherence in legislating in that area. It's not something new. It's not been discovered 5 years ago, and it will not end over the next 5 years. So I'm convinced it's there to stay. The implementing modalities or the speed is something that is up for political discussion. You know, we all read the same sort of newspapers, I imagine, that are very much into latest bubble gossip, etc. And we are also following political discussions, especially in some big member states, where the public is asking their parties if we haven't gone too far. This is obviously a very legitimate political discussion to which the incoming college, the future presidencies, and to a very large extent also the future parliament will need to answer. But from a Commission perspective, I'm 100% convinced that we will continue legislating, and where the onus is put is something the college will decide on. Is it better to extend very fast the domains in which we legislate, or is it better to see to it that what we have already achieved is implemented in a sustainable manner? It's probably neither a yes or no question. It's a question of where you put the cursor. But I'm pretty confident to say that the Green Deal definitely is there to stay. Regarding the global treaty, I think it's always that's a very personal view. So don't quote me, whoever quotes. It's always a very it's always a very tempting answer, saying if something happens on the international level, let's do a global thing. If it can happen, great, fantastic, brilliant. But if we take, for example, international trade bodies as an example, it becomes increasingly difficult to set up global norms. So exactly as my colleague said, we should not wait until something is in place, because otherwise we probably get nowhere. And it's, in my view, less about setting up new rules, as efficient they may be, than actually acting through consumer awareness and consumer traction. Because the reasons why companies are getting more and more sustainable in their production is not only because there are laws punishing them if they don't, it's because they want to sell their stuff. And that's because, and that's an aspect I think we should not forget, and it's just an aspect that works really, really well at least in Europe, the only place I can really judge, because the public opinion is discussing that openly, the pros and cons, and all the different aspects of it. So I'm very confident that that sort of traction will continue, and will continue putting pressure on the legislators that we are, in order to find the best and the best possible and the most efficient way of reaching the targets we are supposed to reach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carsten. And maybe that's also a good reminder for everybody to not forget and go and vote in June. If we want the EU to continue setting standards for us in the EU and globally, we have to make sure they get a mandate to do that. So don't forget to exercise your citizens' rights in June. So we've come to the end of this panel. So I'd like to thank you all. I think it was really, really interesting to hear from your different perspectives. Great thank you to you and to the audience also for your really, really interesting questions. And we have one more speaker, Emmanuel Maire, who is head of unit for circular economy, sustainable production, consumption at DG Environment. You will conclude the discussion. So the floor is yours, Emmanuel.
Very good. Good morning. I hope that the microphone is working. So maybe I'll take yours. Thank you. I would like to thank the Belgian presidency of the Council of the European Union and the United Nations Environmental Programme for this session. Thanks so much, and thanks to all colleagues who will also participate in the next session. I was asked maybe to draw some conclusions from what we have heard, and I would like to do it in 6 points. The first one, on the basis of the discussions, is that there is no doubt that we need to change paradigm for the textile industry and go towards circularity. Why? The reasons are clear. We have a triple crisis: climate, biodiversity, pollution. We have heard also references to the Global Outlook report on the need to reduce our consumptions, because the impact of extraction and processing of materials is huge on our planet. So that was also very high on the discussions. There is also a need to tackle in a better way the social dimension of the textile industry. What we hear also is that there is also a lot of opportunities in that debate in terms of creativity, of design, because we have to rethink the way we produce and we handle textiles. The second point I take is that it's very important to regulate at the level of huge consumption markets, like the European Union is, and there the foundations are being built, be it through the eco-design regulation, the need to make the polluter pays through extended producer responsibility schemes, the need to make sure that we do not export our waste challenges abroad, for example, through the Waste Shipment Directive, and that we also take into account the social aspects through the due diligence or the green claims and the publicity that goes with it. So the foundations are there, and we are now heading for more concrete, detailed measures soon. As we heard, the EU loves to regulate. And the next point, the third point, is how do we make sure that the EU does not regulate in solo, but that we create the right mechanism in terms of bilateral cooperation and global cooperation to get the best outcome. I think it's in our common interest. We want to avoid trade disputes, and the key question is how will we get organized to make sure that we get the good solutions. And it's never easy because the governance is always complex. But I know that we can count on the United Nations system because they have engaged on the textile industry, the textile sector, not only in the United Nations Environmental Programme, but across all UN organizations that are strong on textile. So we will count on you very much to help us building this global outreach and make sure that we avoid division and go towards more common work. The UN system is also very strong in terms of the critical conventions. So even if we don't have a global treaty on textiles, there is a lot of work ongoing on the plastics legally binding treaty, on climate, on biodiversity, on the exports of waste, on the treatment of persistent organic pollutants. So the question is also to make use of the existing legal framework that we have at global level to get the best result. Capacity building has been mentioned as well. So again, that's also a key question for the European Union, but also beyond, I think, to major countries to direct the capacity buildings also to the colleagues who need it. The role of industry is critical, and we have heard that front-runners are also willing to do more. Obviously, the textile industry is one of the most globalized industries, and there is a strong need to go from a linear system, go away from a throwaway society to a circular ambition. And there, I think the big companies also have a key role to play in relation to SMEs. So there are also big needs in terms of ecosystems, industrial ecosystems across the world to play their part. The last part, the last conclusion I draw is consumers and consumer awareness. This is critical to change the system. We have heard the executive director of UNEP referring to the budget dedicated to public relations marketing. How can we make sure that the consumer-facing organizations dedicate their resources to, incentivizing consumers to use long-lasting, repairable products, and ultimately to make sure that fast fashion is out of fashion. And today, the trend is going towards ultra-fast fashion. So there, I think this is a really important link also for the discussions to the next session. Thank you very much.
So there's a coffee break. So thank you very much, and coffee will be served outside.
And there you can see the exhibition that we mentioned earlier, and the students are here, and they will be very happy to explain in person what they have been working on.
It's not good. We're on. Thank you. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Please, dear participants, guests, you are all invited to join us in the room. We will be starting the session. All right, we'll be getting started. Please, you are invited to take your seats. Excellent. Dear participants, dear friends, a very warm welcome to the Youth Forum on Sustainable Fashion Consumption. Thank you very much for joining us today. I would like to take you to 1987. So back in 1987, in the famous report on our common future, the World Environment Commission on Development defined sustainable development as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. Today's forum must be that space for the future generations to make their voice heard. It is the start of the intergenerational dialogue for us to talk about the future that we want for the next generation. When younger speakers amongst us, we will be speaking for the future generations. And this becomes even more relevant since we are at the brink of the Summit of the Future, which will be taking place soon. But also it is important because young people are driving the shift towards sustainable consumption. And we know from the survey that are being conducted around the world, for example, in India and in Bangladesh, 84% of young people from the age of 18 and 25 define their role as a moral responsibility to transition to sustainable consumption. Sustainable consumption is also the priority of United Nations Environment Programme, along with our priority to transition towards more circular business models, towards shared infrastructure for sustainability, and improving environmental and social practices. We're counting on youth, but also many of you in the room, to embrace these other priorities as well. So zooming out, sustainable fashion consumption is only one link of the sustainable textile industry value chain as such. Sustainable textile sector must be resource efficient, must be based on renewables, must be socially just, and must produce high quality, non-toxic and affordable clothing products and services. So let me start with, and if it's done right, of course, it offers opportunities and optimism, 2 O's. So let me start with the first O, opportunities. This is the opportunity to elevate social goals, as many of the speakers in the political panel referred. It is an opportunity to enhance social justice. It is an opportunity to enhance the right of the most marginalized people and their working rights. It's an opportunity to achieve gender equality, and it is an opportunity to achieve human well-being. It's also an opportunity to rethink and revisit our economic systems. It's an opportunity to create quality jobs. It's an opportunity to create quality products and services. And we know that when the market share towards circular business models is increased by 1%, we can reduce CO2 emissions by 13 million tons, and it's a great win-win situation for everyone. So let us embrace these facts, let us embrace these changes, and let us go forward towards sustainable transition in the textile sector. And there is the optimism bit, the second O. Human well-being does not increase by more consumption. And even if I agree with this saying, it's not me saying it, it's the report that was published in May by the Hot and Cool Institute. And our optimism about the promise of the sector only increases when there's evidence that shows and normalizes that tangible, sustainable actions are possible. And when the sector no longer just talks about corporate social responsibility, but the sector communicates and applies sustainability principles whenever they communicate with their consumers. And also it builds and ensures trust and education among public, among youth, amongst all of us. This has been our experience through the Sustainable Fashion Playbook that we launched. What is your experience? Does it make you optimistic, the experience that you have? And this is something that we look forward to hearing more about during the panel discussion today. And we will hear one of those experiences from the EU, since we're hosted in Brussels, Belgium, from our Commissioner for Environment, Sinkevicius, who made us the honor to send the video message, which we will be viewing shortly on our screen. And after the video, we'll have the honor of the panel discussion to be kick-started by our fantastic colleague and a dear friend, Sevim Alkas, who works at the European Commission, DG Klima, in her normal life. But in her free time, she has a second life, which I'm very jealous of. She's the EU ambassador on many interesting questions related to Green Deal and EU sustainable influencer. Thank you very much, Sevim, for joining us and for leading us to a very interesting discussion. But I wish you to enjoy the event and to enjoy and take away the messaging and try to use it in your daily lives so that we do have sustainable lifestyle, so that we do enjoy our human but also planetary well-being. So let us kickstart this event with a video that we had the honor to receive from the Commissioner, Virginijus Sinkevicius.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this invitation.
today you are discussing a sector that is very high on the EU agenda to accelerate the green transition. The textile sector is pulled in two directions. On the bright side, we have economic success, a dynamic and innovative sector that creates business opportunities around the globe. But on the dark side, we have the challenges and the negative impacts we need to avoid. The enormous footprint, unsustainable for the climate, for the environment, for society. What we need is a common circular textiles. Young people are in a great position to inspire and lead this change, reset the trends, create new threads towards responsible consumption, and mobilize many to follow these threads. That's why it's important to make people aware about the impacts of fast fashion as early as possible. Education has an important role to play. It's where the fight against greenwashing and misinformation starts. And it's where the ground for new business models is prepared. By giving young people the right knowledge and the right product information, we increase their power as consumers. And we open up their creativity towards generating ideas for a more sustainable future. We encourage them to demand transparency and sustainable alternatives from well-known brands and to the future creators of such alternatives. Transforming the textile sector will take innovation all along the value chain. From sustainable materials to circular business models, there are countless opportunities for creative solutions. Close collaboration will be essential between governments and industry, between academia and NGOs. By joining forces, we can drive innovation, share best practices, and overcome the barriers to change. Policymakers have a special responsibility. It's our job to create an enabling environment for sustainable fashion. This includes robust regulatory frameworks, incentives for more sustainable practices, and promoting circularity wherever we can. The strategy for sustainable and circular textiles will launch as part of the EU Green Deal is a clear example of our commitment. It shows a Europe determined to lead the transition towards greater sustainability. A systemic transformation of the textile sector is more than a goal. It's an absolute must, and by working together with young people and encouraging innovation and collaboration, we pave the way to a better future, more equitable and more sustainable, to a textile industry that doesn't just thrive, but nurtures the planet for generations to come. Best wishes for the event today.
Can we please get a big round of applause for both talks by Janil and also our commissioner. Thanks a lot, Janil, for your great introductory remarks and also introducing me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today talking about this topic of sustainable fashion. So my name is Sevim Aktas. I mean, I've been very nicely and honorably introduced already. But as Janil said already, yeah, I work in DG Klima on carbon removals and share energy and climate content on my social media in my free time. But today I'm taking a little bit of a, detour, let me say, talking more about fashion with experts that are tackling the entire supply chain, actually, from consumption to going backwards, production. And I would like to call all of them up immediately on the stage as well. Big applause. So we have Kiki, Jana, Berit, Roman, and Quinten. I'll introduce you in a second, but let's get comfortable. Perfect. And actually, let me do this, Kiki, because I stole your microphone. All right. So we're going to take all the hot burning questions on sustainable fashion, but also production in this panel. So we have, starting from the left, we have Kiki Borrell. You're a Dutch young ambassador for the future. You've been a former model and now a sustainable fashion expert, and actually gaining more expertise when it comes to land availability and connections to agricultural practices when it comes to the textile sector. Super interesting. We have Jana Hoskova. You're the Deputy Head of Unit in the Directorate General of Justice Consumers at the European Commission. Very pleased to have you here. We have Quintin Schraap right over here. He's the founding director of Bakerman, which is an innovative textile platform. So really nice to also have the practical experience covered here. Going over to Bert Keisbroek. There we go. You're a professor of law at KU Leuven, and one of your latest publications was on the production and consumption and circular economy of the textile legislation. So we're looking forward to your insights when it comes to that. And finally, Roman Maliza. There we go. And you're a public affairs strategist in Textile Exchange, which is an advocacy for sustainable textile production. Can we have a big applause for our speakers again? So we have a very interesting setup today because we're going to have 2 rounds of questions essentially, and then we also have the youth panel part, and this is where you guys will become active as well in discussions. So be prepared for that later, but more instructions and how it's going to work I'll touch upon at the end of the panel. But I would say let's directly dive into it, right? I would love to hear from everyone, and maybe we could start with you, Kiki, and then go over. What you see as one of the most important systematic changes needed when it comes to environmental footprint of the fashion industry and fashion consumption?
Yeah, that's such a good question. A very big one also to start with, so thank you. I think as of now, most of the initiative and changes that we're seeing are really focused on the design to end-of-life phase of clothing garments. And what I would like to see, like for example, eco-design looks at repairability, and the circular economy looks at new business models. But what I would like to see is changes to go further than that, and then you arrive at production of materials, which actually has the biggest climate impact of a garment's life cycle. So the situation as it is now, we produce way too much, and we need to drastically reduce this. We have enough clothes to dress 6 generations, and yet there is still this influx of very cheap, low-quality garments. So how can we reduce this? Well, a first step for me would be to look at overproduction, which was already said before. We have a 30% of clothing that is being unsold. I mean, what a waste of resources, what a waste of energy. So we need to really address that. And for that, I have 2 solutions, I would say. And I know you ask one, but I think they feed into each other. And the first would be living wages. So we need to pay workers in the garment sector a fair wage. The overproduction is driven by, on the one part, brands don't know how much they're going to sell, but the other part is that it's very cheap for brands to produce, to overproduce, to order way too much and then just destroy it. Thank God we're not going to be able to do that anymore. And a living wage would make the production costs higher for brands. They would actually pay fair wages to the garment workers, and it would de-incentivize them to overorder. So that would be the first one. And then the second one is, and this is very important, brands should publish their production volumes, so the number of items they are producing and the number of styles that they are bringing on the market. This would increase transparency and make it for us as consumers way easier to compare brands. So now, for example, you have 2 brands that are both using organic cotton to produce t-shirts. We can compare them. They both use organic cotton, so I guess they're equally sustainable. But if these brands have to publish their production volumes and their number of styles, we can see that the one brand is actually producing millions of these cotton t-shirts, organic cotton t-shirts, but millions, and they're producing different styles, different colors, different patterns all the time, fueling microtrends and fueling overconsumption, because we as consumers feel we need a new t-shirt because there is a new color. Now, the second brand is also using organic cotton, but they only produce what is being ordered, so they do made to order. And they only have 1 style and 3 different colors. So they are not overproducing, they're not fueling microtrends, and they're just not fueling overconsumption. So these are 2 things that for me are very important, and from there we can of course look, do we need a cap on this production, do we need a cap on overproduction, and actual set straight numbers for that, but I think my time is up.
Yeah. But very concrete, I like it, and a great scene setter also for the remaining discussion. Jana.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. There are not so many fora that will be devoted to consumers solely. Nowadays we speak a lot about competitiveness of our industries, but we shall also speak about the importance of empowering consumers, be it in the digital transition and in the green transition especially. So from the consumer perspective, I would say one of the most important systemic changes here is to keep our clothes longer in use. I mean, I advocate for that in in all sectors, for all consumer goods. So, of course, subject to certain conditions. But here, I think it's really telling. It's really important. I would like to give you the combination of two visions that I really like. So first is the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles, but the other one is the new consumer agenda that is valid until the end of next year. And if you combine these two visions, it really gives you a good objective, or it gives you the objective indeed for the years to come. So by 2030, the textile products that are placed on the EU market, they shall be long-lived, as I said, the longer used, and recyclable. And to a great extent, they shall be made of recycled fibers. They shall be free of hazardous products, substances, and they shall be produced in respect of social rights and environment. And then consumers, they shall be benefiting from affordable and sustainable textiles. Okay, and now the other perspective, this is again the producer, to a great extent, the producer perspective. And now the consumer one is that empower us, to be active in this transition. Without actually imposing a concrete lifestyle and without a social discrimination. I think that these are really important elements. And then there also, I was thinking about, of course, it's always important to have the right the right speech or right elements for the right audience. So I was thinking here how to make this happen. So of course make the clothes sustainable by design, but then make the sustainable consumer goods or textile affordable, meaning internalize environmental costs, and then also remunerate the workers adequately. Then provide the consumers with reliable information on sustainability features of the textile, but also how to maintain, how to keep them in longer use. And then, and this is precisely what we are working on these days, it's ban the greenwashing practices and regulate green and social claims. Also protect consumers from dark patterns. These are the so-called deceptive design patterns that you encounter, especially young people, when shopping online for textile, that also induce excessive demand for textile. We are looking also at aggressive, personalized advertising. Also, another great concern that we have are the excessive returns of sold goods that were not worn and then they are later on destroyed. Also, consumers shall use more the legal guarantees. Whenever the consumer good, the textile is actually has a defect, it's important that this is brought back to the trader. So the trader also can see that there might be some production problem.
On this point, Jana, I would love to pick it up in the remaining part of the discussion. I mean, so many useful, very practical hints already. Could you shortly mention, before I give over to Quintin, where our audience can find all these suggestions? Essentially, is it in one of the reports or in a?
No, it's not necessarily one report. It's actually the way we are. I mentioned the different strategies, okay, that we have put forward, but also, I mean, we have, of course, we communicate with the public through our websites, so we are very much present on online.
So I would really recommend, if you're also very more interested in this in the concrete suggestions on how to change consumer behavior, to also follow up on that on our European Commission social media accounts. But I would love to dive into that in the second part of the panel more in detail. With this, I would love to hand over to Quentin. What is your suggestion for a systematic change?
Well, thank you very much for having me here as well. I think what my colleagues already said are very, very important parts, and I very much agree. I think one of the things that we also really need to take into account is strengthening the relationship between the textile industry, the current textile industry, and the next generation of designers and creators. There is, at this moment, I think, still a bit of a gap between what this new generation wants, where they want to head into, what they want to do, and how the textile industry is functioning. By strengthening the relationship and going back to more like a collaborative relationship, I think in the last decade, there has been a bit of a shift where the relationship between brands and textile manufacturers evolved really into something only transactional. While we and I truly believe that it is so important to co-create and to listen to each other and to work together, and really strengthen this relationship is one of the key things to do.
Thanks for sharing your views. I'll forward to Bert.
Thank you very much. Thanks also for having me today. I think I would like to come back to one important legislative file that was already raised this morning by John Wante. A real game changer, I think, will be this ESPR, this Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation. So this regulation will set out a framework for the adoption of ecological requirements for textile products. So that's a very, not only for textile products, but for all kind of products, including textile products. And so under the delegated acts, it will be possible to have technical requirements on not only material use, material efficiency, but also on repairability, on fiber-to-fiber recyclability, on maintenance and stuff like that. So I think this will be a game changer, because in time it will allow simply to have only sustainable textile products on the EU market. Unsustainable textile products will no longer be allowed on the market. So it's a hugely important new step that has been taken. I also think in combination with this, and work is already underway, there will be a digital product passport. So the Surpass 2 project is underway. This digital product passport will simply allow all of us, but not just all of us as consumers, but also all actors across the textile supply chain, to have easy access to the most important information in relation to the product sustainability aspects of those particular products. And that's really important. You will also get access as consumers potentially to information on how to maintain that textile product, on which aspects or which components of the textile product. Think of a blue jeans, whether you can replace the zipper or not. What is the expected lifetime of that blue jeans and all that. There will be information, hopefully, that will be provided throughout the digital product passport. There's also a link with textile labeling, of course, to all of us. So I think I'm really quite enthusiastic also from a legal perspective on this major step that has been taken.
I mean, it's crazy how much impact just transparency and information can have in this regard. Finally, Roman, what are your views? What are the systematic changes that to transform the sector?
Yeah, thank you, Seving. So I think one of the main points were actually already mentioned this morning by Inge Andersen or Emmanuel Maire when they were talking about like this triple crisis that we are facing, the crisis of climate, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Because for me and for the organization I'm working with, one of the most important systemic changes, but really shifting our thinking and really embracing a holistic strategy that encompasses climate and nature at the same time. It's really like two sides of the same coin, in the sense that we cannot have only a carbon tunnel vision when we are thinking of like the whole textile supply chain and its impact on the planet, but also people. So basically, indeed, it is about like reducing the climate impact and the GHG emissions of the textile supply chain, but also ensuring that this industry actually drive beneficial impacts, whether it's for soil health, biodiversity, fresh water. And actually, I know we're talking about sustainable fashion consumption, but I'm going to take you a bit actually to the other side of the supply chain, because Textile Exchange is really focusing on raw materials extraction and production, and basically how these raw materials are farmed, sourced, extracted, and produced at the very beginning already represent 24% of the GHG emission just for that of the textile supply chain. And what we've been working on for the past couple of years, it's this strategy that we're calling Climate Plus, because the aim is really to reduce the GHG emission of the industry that come from raw materials extraction by 45% by 2030. But we are really focusing on also taking into consideration what this process and this step of the supply chain can bring in a positive sense, let's say, to the people, but also the production. And we think that policy has a really important role to do that. And like with the Green Deal, the EU started really strongly, and it must continue for the next 5 years, especially focusing on, as I mentioned, nature, biodiversity, etc. They mentioned it, initiatives have started, but now we need to get going with more concrete initiatives.
That's a very good hint at the European election, guys. It's less than a month ahead of us, so keep that in mind, and also don't forget to let your friends and family back at home know to go voting. On this point, I really liked what you're mentioning about this, about the production and overproduction part of it. I mean, a quarter of the emissions is coming from the resource extraction for the textile sector. On this point, I would like to directly link to the question to you, Bert. When it comes to this narrative change about overconsumption and overproduction as well, how can we do that in a way that's leading to a positive, like in a positive way, in a positive messaging towards sustainable practices?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. So I just talked about the supply side requirements that are now will be put in place, but of course also at the demand side, there's already a lot of new regulations, rules in place, such as the Directive on Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition, but also the upcoming Green Claims Directive will be important. It will also be important, why? Because it will actually, hopefully, give a framework for all kind of companies in the textile sector to be able to communicate on their sustainability efforts, to communicate on the product sustainability information of their products. And so it's important that those two files that I mentioned, that eventually these files are coherent and that there's legal certainty for companies in the sector. The most unsustainable textile products will no longer be allowed on the market, that's for sure. But in between various less or more sustainable textile products, there should be fair communication by businesses on these products and on these product characteristics, and greenwashing should not be allowed. But we should also avoid greenhushing, where companies simply do not longer dare to communicate on their sustainability efforts and on the product sustainability aspects of their products, simply because there's legal uncertainty on whether they will be caught or not. So that's a very important element. I think all of this is important. Most of the legislative files that we see coming from the European Commission right now are really trying to also incentivize not only sustainable production but also sustainable consumption. But it's about empowering consumers to make green choices if they want so. It's not about really disincentivizing unsustainable choices. There's no policy in place really to combat psychological obsolescence right now. And it's also difficult to come up, as a lawyer, to come up with rules, with regulations that can effectively combat, for example, psychological obsolescence. You could do much more to stimulate repair, for example. We have a right to repair directive, but still under the legal guarantee, it was already mentioned, repair is not as such prioritized under the new rules proposed. So I think more will have to be done also in terms of thinking about sustainability patterns and sustainability levels, about sufficiency, about what we can do with economic incentives also to really make that shift and to make, as it was called, fast fashion out of fashion.
Yeah, speaking about all these sustainable practices and the role of consumers, I would love to ask you, Jana, about, because you mentioned a set of nudges that one can put in from a sustainable consumption perspective. Would you mind elaborating on that? So how can we empower the green transition and with sustainable consumption?
Yes, I think I was the obvious speaker after you, Bert, because you put forward the number of regulations that we worked on, also together with Emmanuel in DG Environment, on how to empower the EU consumers to consume sustainably. Indeed, it's a question of also personal autonomy, right? How much you can regulate the personal choice. So you have to, we've been thinking a lot about this, okay? So we are trying to, of course, regulate what is regulatable and how far we can go. So how far we went is to, let's say, clear the market from all those green claims that are unsubstantiated, that are totally misleading, such as planet-friendly. What does that mean? But this is, let's say, really still the lowest common denominator. This is the lowest level. That's the kind of foundational. I think that we need to also together with, so that's the unfair commercial practice, that is the directive on the empowering consumers for the green transition. That's the consumer law. And then we built up on that with the green claims directive, where we, together with the verifiers in the member states, we will verify the businesses. They will have to subject their green claims to verification before a product is placed on the market. But will that be enough? If you have one product saying it has been produced with 50% less water and the other one 33% less of plastic, what does that tell you? So of course the eco-design is important, but it will take time before all the unsustainable products are out of the market. And then according to our statistics, we see that consumers, they really want to contribute to the green transition. They really feel the triple planetary crisis. But then when they shop, there are still all these hurdles that they experience. So according to our surveys, it's around 20% of consumers that they really consider the environmental problems or features of the product. And then, so we have, of course, I wanted to also mention the EU eco-label, which is really something that that the consumers shall show much more demand for EU eco-labeled products. And then also the producers will be then enticed, incentivized to apply and to increase the qualities of the products.
Yeah, thanks a lot for elaborating on the different regulations and directives on that. It's nice to have like a little primer into what all of that means. Kiki, I'm looking at you because I would love to hear from you on the role that you can play in this transition, like narrative transition, but also from a practical perspective. What can we do?
Yeah, I really like that question because we are talking a lot about policies, but I think in this transition, everyone can be an agent of change. And I love the younger generation because they are super outspoken and you cannot lie to them because they will research and they will tell you off. So that's something that all youth should do and continue to do. Be in your power in that way. I think we can all agree that young generation is winning the game of social media. So that is really where your power lies as well. So in this social media, you can be outspoken about brands that do use greenwashing or unsustainable practices. Or if you order something from a brand and you see that the quality is extremely bad, speak up about it because brands will notice. But also on a positive note, you can start challenges like let's only buy 5 items this year, let's only buy vintage, or you can support sustainable brands and show why you think they are sustainable. And in that perspective, I think you should also see that by yourself you can do a lot, but you are stronger together. So there's this great app that I came across. It's called Chili, and there you can join campaigns of others. So for example, a campaign could be, hey guys, let's all comment on this brand that they have to pay workers a living wage, or let's comment that they have to disclose their production volumes. And then if you all do it together, the brand is gonna notice. So that's something that is really great. Also, you can also send a letter through this app to policymakers or to brands. And if you do it all together, they will start noticing. And then the last thing you can do is, of course, in your personal space. So be an agent of change there as well. Make it cool to repair, to rewear, really change this context that we're in, and be someone who sets the trend, being a sustainable trend and not following the microtrends.
I love how you're emphasizing this bundling of voices together. Can you mention the platform again and spell it out? Chili?
Chili, C-H-I-L-L-I.
I think this is a really, really powerful tip, to be honest. Jana, would you like to quickly add something?
Kiki, this is great. You are calling for consumer movement. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a very powerful movement that one can establish that way. Looking at you, Quentin, I would love to, I mean, since you are the founder of a business, essentially, I would love to hear from your perspective on what it means from a sustainable business model perspective to enter this textile sector. And what would be your learnings to share in that from that field?
So being the founder of Bakermat, maybe a small introduction. Bakermat is a textile platform where we work in partnership with textile mills from around the world. One of the things we do is having a very pragmatic retail space. It's just a fabric shop in essence. But the idea is really to communicate the textile mills in our shop. So we really have partnerships. We communicate who is the mill, how are they working, what's their expertise, what is their craft. And then putting these materials directly in the hands of young creators. We collaborate with schools, fashion schools, but also just independent designers. And of course also the big community of still, I think this morning it was mentioned, hand sewers and hobbyists at home. Having these materials available and sharing who the manufacturer is really helps also by creating something which is very important, which is an emotional value to the product of to textiles, and then taking that emotional value of textiles with them into the garment they are creating with it. this again also goes back to what my colleagues this morning also said in having adding value to materials and to products, which is very important in if you want to use them for a longer period of time, or if you just want to throw them away after you wore it once. And next to that, I think, like, of course, like, this industry has been so untransparent for so long. There's a very traditional way of how the textile industry operates. And in this sense, that's why what we are doing is trying to bridge the needs of the young designers and the next generation of designers with what the textile industry is doing. We also get the question directly from our textile partners that they want to know how to connect with this new generation because they also don't know. So I think we are in a very interesting position at this moment. Of course, still there's many obstacles to overcome. But I think some of the already things that are being done on EU level with the digital product passport coming will help. And regulations will help. But I think also another thing that we noticed, that we are working with leading textile mills from Italy, for example, bigger textile mills. But we're also working together with hand weaving companies from India, hand weaving companies from Bangladesh, and some of the things we thought for the longest time that, for example, certificates are the solution to all of our problems. But many people forget that to have a certificate, you have to pay for a certificate. And a small hand weaving company from India does not have the budget to pay for a certificate. So does that make that small hand weaving company from India produce less sustainable than a big industry mill from Italy who has big budgets to spend on all of the certificates they want, and also have the budget to implement, of course, the regulations around these certificates. And I think this is my personal motivation why I started my business, to have an open dialogue about all of these things, but to also explain to people and educate people about all of these different aspects.
I mean, there's so many things to cover regarding that, honestly, and also I can imagine as like a small business entering this huge textile industry with big companies on the line. It's definitely requires courage, but also yes, doing forward. So thanks a lot for your work on this, spearheading this sustainable startup scale up type of experience. So. On this note, touching upon the production side, Roman, I would love to hear from you how we could match this like growing demand for products in any sorts. Do you think it's feasible to curb that demand, or how can we match this growth demand with sustainable practices?
I mean, for sure, slowing growth and the resource use reduction underpins everything. I mean, we need to be able to work in sync with the planet boundaries, but also the people who sustain this industry. But this will not be enough. I mean, we've seen it and we talked about it with fast fashion, ultra fast fashion. Demand is still there, very fast and huge demand is still there. So it will not be enough. So what is also necessary is material substitution. And what I mean by that is to be able to accelerate the production, the use and the adoption of preferred fibers and raw materials. And what I mean by that is like more sustainable alternatives to the conventional fibers. For example, you have a cotton t-shirt, then an organic cotton t-shirt can be an alternative. You have a polyester swimsuit, maybe recycled polyester can be. And this is something that we are really working on at Textile Exchange, because we have, and we put forward, as you mentioned, the standards and the certificate all over the world to prove and to back up which fibers are actually more sustainable. And we cover everything from animal to plant fibers to man-made and synthetics in order to promote more sustainable material sourcing. And actually, that's also why I think policy has a role, as you mentioned, certificates, you have to pay for it. And I think that EU laws, especially, for example, with the green claims right now, must align with these standards that are already recognized globally and used globally, and also make them more available and accessible to whichever company, whatever the size it is, to be able to have more certified, basically, companies and manufacturers and suppliers, so they are more adopted and used and also seen by the consumers, and that's how it can go from the very first beginning of the supply chain to the consumers to have this knowledge, basically. So yeah, this is something we're really trying to put forward and to promote, to do that.
I'm honestly super impressed how much information and dense information we managed to put in this short panel. To round off, I would love to ask each of you for one key takeaway, like one sentence that you would like to share with the audience before we head towards the discussions. Kiki, would you like to kick it off?
I think for me the key takeaway, if I can summarize so much information like you're saying, would be to slow down production, slow down consumption, rethink what you are doing, rethink if you're going to buy it, am I going to be able to borrow it? There's so many different ways besides buying something new. So if you slow down and rethink, I think then we can go come far.
Very nice one. Jana?
As I started, I will close. So keep your clothes in longer use.
That's to the point.
Quinten? For me, one sentence, one key takeaway for this and to close off is be aware of what you are doing with your own practices, but also always keep in mind, we talked a lot about sustainability and policies for it and rules for it, but also keep in mind what is sustainability in that sense to you or to your project, because I think there is still not one answer. It's such a complex issue where there is no one rule to sort of like solve it, and I think dialogue is the solution between all parties involved.
Thanks a lot. Bert?
I would say time is now, stakes are high. I think that we should really also start thinking not only in terms of consumer rights maybe, but maybe also some types of consumer duties. Because the throwaway society that we know is simply unsustainable.
And Roman?
For me, it would be question and get your information. I mean, even if it's just looking at the label, then when you start getting your information, you have even more questions. Maybe you will need to go to the brand's website, etc. But once you got started, you don't stop and you get even more interested in it, and it really informs the way you consume and the way you wear your clothes, and then maybe get even more attached to it emotionally, as we mentioned. And this is a really interesting journey to be on. I just started quite recently, actually, so I encourage you to do that.
I mean, what a nice point to end on. Curiosity, essentially. Curiosity, asking questions and seeking answers. On this point, I would like to ask you for a big applause to our panelists. Thanks a lot. Thanks for sharing your views. Yeah, if you want, you can head. I'll do that in a second as well. But before that, I would like to quickly announce how the group discussions will work on, because we also want to hear from you. So what will happen in a second, so we'll have like a closure remarks, and then afterwards we're going to go over to the group discussions. But as you can see, all over the room there are 3 boards hanging around, namely on fashion culture, on fashion communication, and fashion production. And as I said, we would love to hear your views on these topics. We have beautiful young advocates. Could you all please raise your hands, all the young advocates, so people can see you? Yes, so they will be guiding the discussions, and you can just arrange yourself in the room. But before doing that, I would love to call up John Vante from the Belgian presidency to give some closing remarks. Big applause, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Is this working? Yes, or I will take this one. Yes, okay, thank you. Yeah, so to wrap up this very interesting panel discussion, I've heard many things, and I see actually quite a parallel with other challenges we are facing, not only in the textile industry, but also in other parts of our consumption system. A couple of months ago, we had a lot of farmer protests, and I see a lot of parallels there. We also have there a problem of farmers that are maybe underpaid and are forced into overproduction, and by a system that is not taking into account the work they are doing in a proper way. And I see a parallel here also with the textile industry, that we have a global system that is underpaying production, and that they are really forced into an overproduction. So I was glad to hear also that living wages that this needs to be addressed, and that this is taken up also by the younger people and in campaigns, because I think really there is a crucial issue that we need to address. Then secondly, we also heard a lot about consumers and the need to inform them and to guarantee that they have the right information, the proper information, that we do not only have positive information about what is a green textile, but also that we have the other information, that there is not a hushing. I heard the term hushing, that companies that do not do a good job in producing sustainable textiles, that they also need to come out and be open about what are the downsides of their products. So I think we don't not only need green claims, but also very good labels addressing all aspects of sustainability, not only the good, but also the bad ones. And then I think also what I learned is that we do also have to look at the way we organize the textile system. I've heard about other ways of creating a dialogue between designers and textile industry, about organizing your value chain in another way. That is more open to dialogue with consumers, to dialogue with producers, and I think that is also what is really missing now when we look at the textile value chain now. It's really a system organized in a very linear way, and it's not really allowing any interaction between consumers, producers, or designers, and all that. So I think there is a long way still to go before we end up with a sustainable value chain of textiles. And I'm very glad to see that also young people are really taking this subject very seriously. So I would also like to thank very much all the young people, the Youth Forum, that have worked on this. This is really important work that you are doing. You are really laying foundations for future policy work, and I see a lot of enthusiasm here, and this is also giving me personally energy, because I'm the person often going to meetings where you have a lot of resistance for ambitious proposals, but I see that there is still hope with the youth. So very much thank you for the Youth Forum to organize this, and a big applause for this organization.
yeah, on that note, I invite everyone to pick a topic and spread yourself around the room, enjoy, and afterwards we'll be heading for lunch as well. Thanks a lot for your participation, and thanks a lot for UNEP for putting this together.